everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and being as we've got a rainy day here in Spain today, I thought it'd be a perfect day to do a video for you all. And today we're going to carry on with making our Lilly Rose Dolls Harvey the Hedgehog, and we're working on his outfit. So I've got his shirt made and I've got his trousers made, and those videos are now live on my YouTube channel already for you. And today we're going to make his waistcoat. So he's got this beautiful double-breasted waistcoat here, and I'm choosing this fabric here, which is by Rifle Paper Company, I believe it's called, and it's got this beautiful blues and greens and golds in there, and that's going to work, I think, really nicely with Harvey's existing trousers and shirt. So I'm really excited to bring this video to you, and I really want to say a really big thank you to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls, who've gifted the pattern to me so that I can bring this YouTube sew-along video to you. So thank you very much to Richard and Claire of Lilly Rose Dolls, and I'm really enjoying the process, so there's going to be lots more to come. The other thing that I just wanted to say was that whilst I'm making the 16-inch Harvey Today waistcoat, then these instructions will work for any of the sizes for the characters, and the waistcoat, if it's a similar pattern and look as the one that's on Harvey on one of your characters, it doesn't have to necessarily be Harvey's waistcoat that you're sewing. It can be the instructions will work for any of the sizes and also for any of the characters, because the clothes are interchangeable. So I just wanted to let you know that and point that out. So let me tilt the camera down and we'll get started. In true Back to the Future form, I'm just popping back with the finished waistcoat just to show you, so that you can see how that looks and whether this is the finish that you would like to get on your waistcoat. Hopefully you'll agree that that looks really smart on him. It's got the little popper fastenings inside here, little press stud fastenings, and those brass buttons down the front. So I'll pop off again now that you've seen what we actually make today, and hopefully you'll enjoy making this with me. See you in a minute. So let me just put Harvey out the way, waiting patiently for his delightful waistcoat, and I'm going to direct you first of all to the pattern. So you'll have got your pattern from Lilly Rose Dolls. They're online, and whilst they are going to be shipping internationally, I think, at some stage as well, so look out for that. And we've already made Harvey the Hedgehog. He's already live, and we're now on to his waistcoat. So you'll need to turn to the back of your pattern pages to find your waistcoat pattern, and then when you've found that, what I want you to do, obviously what I recommend you do, is actually trace your pattern pieces off, because I like to keep the master copy of my pattern, the original that comes from the designer, intact, and I use tracing paper to make copies of my patterns that I can use time and time again. And so that's the way that I do mine. They can use greaseproof paper, or you can use tissue paper, or tracing paper from an arts or stationer's shop, and it really helps to get used to doing that, because then you do save your pattern as a master copy. I'm trying to slow down with my talking, can you tell? The one thing that you do need to know about is that the line that you see in the pattern, okay, that's for his trousers, is your stitching line. So this is a stitching line, so you need to remember to add some seam allowance onto the sides of this, each pattern piece, so that you can actually sew your pieces together. If you use this line to cut out on your fabric, you will then you'll be then making the garment smaller, and then you run the risk of it not fitting your character. It does say all of this on the bottom of the pattern, add 1/4 inch seam allowance unless otherwise indicated. And so that's why when you see my patterns, I've got two lines. I've got this line on the inside, which is actually my stitching line, and then I've also got the line on the outside here, which is my cutting line for my fabric, and I've added 1/4 inch seam allowance to all of the edges on each of these pieces, except for where I'm going to be placing my pattern on the fold line, because we don't need any extra just there. And we're going to, if you need any more information about the pattern, because I'm not going to go into great detail about that now, there is a standalone video in the Lilly Rose Dolls Basics videos. You'll see it in my channel. I'll try and link it up here for you, where I show you in detail how to do that and how to add your mark so that you can add your seam allowance on the curved edges and be confident that that's all correct. So that's already there, so I shan't repeat myself with that. But you want to choose a really lovely fabric for your waistcoat. It's quite a feature on the pattern here and really makes that outfit pop. And that's why I've chosen this fabric here. The flowers might be a little on the large side for the size of the character, but because I'm working from my stash, then I'm working with what I've got, and this just matched so nicely with the green of his trousers, and pulled the blue and the green together that I just thought it was just too perfect not to use. I'm also going to be using a silky lining fabric, which I've not got out, but I'm going to find that in a second, because I find that if you use all cotton for his shirt, for the lining and for the top, sometimes it can get a bit bulky, especially if you're trying to turn it through. So my recommendation is, if you've got any old lining fabric, or if you're using a garment that has been lined previously and you've got that in your stash, then you can recycle that fabric. Or you can just buy a kit from Lilly Rose Dolls and then you've got everything you need within that. So that will be what I'm doing. I'm not using a kit, but you might be doing that today. And anything that's got a lovely kind of sheen to it as well would look great. A brocade, a silk would look lovely. Perhaps if we've got enough fabric, you can sometimes make things out of old ties. You can use all sorts of things to make these, or you have a little bit of fabric left over, or in your charity shop bag, you've perhaps got an old dress that you can use as well, and you can use that for your fabric. So there's lots of choices there. Okay, let me get my lining fabric together. I'm going to give this fabric a quick press so that it's got no creases in it, and then we'll talk about laying your fabric, your pattern onto your fabric and then cutting it out. Okay, so I've got my fabric, two fabrics here. I've got this dark green lining fabric, which is just a polyester lining, which will do very nicely for the inside. And then the outside of the fabric will be this cotton, 100% cotton. And what we will need to look for is either the selvage edge, which is this bound edge on the side of a fabric, and that runs alongside the length of the fabric. Or we need to just be able to identify which is the north and south and the east and west. So we've got the warp and the weft threads in order to be able to get our pattern pieces laid down correctly, so that the garment doesn't distort. And all of these tips and tricks that I talk about, and that's why I go into all of this, is because whilst we're sewing on a miniature scale for a doll today, and that's still really important, but all of these skills that you're learning now will transfer directly to dressmaking, whether it's for yourself or for a loved one. So it's just practice to get into. So we've got our fabric piece here, and the first thing I'm going to do is work with our main fabric, and we're going to be folding this fabric on the grain. So what I want to do is I want to fold this fabric so it's going to give me a folded edge that I can work with. And in order to do that, what we can do is we can measure from the folded edge into the selvage edge. Let me just get my pattern pieces, because we need one folded edge. And if we cut out two like this on with the right sides together or the wrong sides together, it doesn't make a difference which one you use. You will automatically get a left and a right when you cut these out. If you are using fabric and you want to cut it out on the single, perhaps for pattern placement or something like that, you need to make sure that you cut one with your pattern writing up, and then you turn the pattern over and you draw one with the pattern side down, because that will give you your left and your right. If you cut out two this way without turning your pattern over, you'll get two lefts or two rights, and we need a left and we need a right, and so we need to remember to flip that pattern piece over. But that's the beauty of actually sewing these or making these when you're on the fold, because you actually get two pattern pieces out at the same time. And you automatically get your left and your right. So what I'm doing is just feeling for the top of the fabric here so that we can go up as far as we can. I like to save fabric if I can do, and I need to come down just a little smidge because I'm using a scrap of fabric. So just be aware that when you lay your fabrics down, you need to make sure, and I can feel underneath this section where this line goes across, to make sure that you've got all of your pattern piece onto your fabric, and that it's not disappearing off, and then you're going to waste your fabric because you'll need to cut another one out. Once you're happy that you've got your fabric on a fold, such as this, then we can just cut this out, or pin it to the pattern first, and then we can cut it out after, can't we? So I just roughly pin that on for now. And then for me, I'm going to try and save as much of this main fabric as I can do. So I'm going to come down over here, and I'm going to be cutting out my 2 of my fronts from this section here. And I'm looking on the back here, and I can see the fibres, and I'm making sure that as far as possible they're going up and down. You can also, when you're working with a selvage edge, you can measure from the folded edge to the selvage edge at the top and the bottom, just to make sure that your fabric is also straight, which is also a good thing to do. But on here I can just see the grain of the fabric, and I can make sure that this piece here is going to fit on there just beautifully, in order to use what we can and preserve the main part of the fabric. If you're just using yardage, or if you're not worried about preserving the fabrics, then because you're using something that you've got from the kit or specifically, then you can just work with that and just put yours pattern pieces in from the sides. Just make sure it's double so that you've cutting out your left and your right at the same time. Okay, we've only got the 2 pattern pieces, so once we've got these pinned on, then we can go ahead and cut these out, and then I'll meet you back when we talk about pinning and cutting for our lining. Okay, so I've got my 2 pieces cut out of my main fabric, and now I'm going to be working with my lining. So I can just show you how to straighten up this fabric should you need to. So I've got this piece of lining fabric cut in half, and we've got a very clear selvage edge that we're working to. So working in centimetres, I'm just measuring from the folded edge to the edge, and I'm at 18.5 centimetres there. So then I can move up towards the top here, and I can check again there, and I can see again I'm 18.5 centimetres. So I'm happy that this fabric is on grain. So I'm just going to place my first piece, making sure that we get right up to the edges, and that fold line has to be right on top of that fold line, and then I'm just popping my pins in to hold that part in place. That's it. And then I'm going to now take my second piece, which is for my waistcoat, and what I'm going to do now is draw in the line, the grain line, just make that longer. So I'm just going to draw that up to the top of towards the top of the piece of the fabric. So I've just extended that grain line, which is the double-ended line with the arrows on either end, and now I can place that onto my fabric. Now what I do is measure from that folded edge again, and measure into the edge of the pattern piece. Once I'm happy that I've got that straight and that we're not going off the edge of our fabric underneath, because it's a scrap, we just have to make sure of that. Then I'm going to put a pin in towards the bottom, then I'm going to go to the top of the grain line and measure again, and then making sure that says 13 as well, just needs to go across slightly. And then once I'm happy with that, I can put a pin in at the top here as well to hold that down. So that just helps make sure that you're on grain with your pattern pieces and that it's going to lie beautifully straight. So what I'm going to do now is just put the rest of my pins in, and then I'm going to cut this out as well. So we've got our pattern pieces all cut out now, and we've got the back of the main waistcoat, and then we've got our 2 fronts that are going to go like that. That's going to look really lovely, I think. And then we've also got the back and the front of our waistcoat. Now I'm going to just have a quick look on this folded ones to see. So we've got one side together. So I think my right side is on the inside, so I'm going to put a pin in just in the seam allowance, so don't mark the delicate fabric, like that on the right side of my fabric, because it would be easy to get it mixed up. And sometimes there can be a slight difference with the sheen of the fabric on the lining fabrics, depending on whether it's a right way round or a wrong way round. And if you've got a plain coloured fabric, then that can happen too. So remembering that I've got my right sides together at the moment, then I can separate these out so that I've got right sides up for now, and then I can then again just pin on my seam allowance here and again here, and that will just remind me that which side is up and that just makes sure they all look the same. And once I've got those together, then I can just switch those around so that we've got a left and a right, and we've got our back, and then we've got our back here and our left and our right of our oh, can't see on the camera there, can you? That wrong side, this side, a left and a right here as well. Okay, so we are going to be using 2 different colour threads because we need one thread colour for sewing on the top of the fabric, and I'm going to use this grey blue colour, which should work quite nicely. And then I'm also going to use a dark green, which should go quite nicely onto my lining fabric. So it will mean that I do need to change my threads over when I'm sewing, but once I've got the actual waistcoat lining sewed together, then I'll probably be able to switch onto anywhere where I'm sewing the top fabric to the lining. I'll be able to use the same colour, this light bluey grey colour. And that will just make things a bit easier. So just be aware of that, because if I were to sew the side seams together, say on my green lining with my light blue thread, that's really going to show and not look as neat as if I've just taken that extra minute just to change my threads over and sew that up in the dark green. So I will be doing that as we progress. But if you want to get to this stage, and then come back to me and we'll get started with the sewing. Okay, so I've got my machine threaded up now. Now I've gone with the dark green thread first because I think that we'll be doing most of the stitching in the grey. So by using the dark green first, hopefully it'll cut down on the number of times we have to change our thread over. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the back of our lining, and we're going to have that the right side up, and we know that because our pin tells us. And then I'm going to take each of my side pieces and I'm going to turn them over and pop them down so that I can put the side seams together. And then I'm going to put a pin in each one, well, 2 pins, one at the top and one at the bottom, in order just to hold that together. Just make sure you've got your raw edges together. And if you've got silk pins, then they're useful for working with these finer fabrics if you have those. And the way that you tell which way round it is and which is the side seam is the side seam is this shorter seam down the side here, and you've got this really curvy section just here, and that's where it's going to go around his arm, and then this longer bit at the top here is his neckline, and that's the top of his shoulder. So there's my pin showing the right way up, so I'm going to fold it over, and then I'm going to attach it onto the side of this one just here, onto the back. And again, just put those raw edges together on the back there. I'll show you again when we do the other side, because it might be easier to see with the other fabric, because we can pin that at the same time even though we're not going to sew it straight away. So that's what it's going to look like when you've actually got everything all pinned together. And because they're not sort of the seams aren't in conflict with each other for pinning at the same time, so we can do that. And once we've got those things together, the right sides together again for our stitching, we can take out the pins that are telling us the right side and the wrong side, because we've already done that bit now, so we know where we are and we're all straight. So this time I'm going to just put on my sewing machine in order to be ready to stitching, but let's get the next one set up as well. So here's our back, and again here's the orientation. Here's the top of the shoulders, here's the back of the neck, here's the arm side where the arms are going to go, and here's the side seams and the hem. So then we're just going to take one front piece, so here's my 2 front pieces down together. Oops, no, you can't see that. Here's my 2 front pieces, and I've put them so that they're mirror copies of each other. So if you look, we've got the neckline here that comes into the V, which is the same as on the pattern. This long straight edge, we've got these points down the bottom here, which go down for the front of his waistcoat, and here's the side seams, and there's the arm side. So let's take each one of these in place. So this one that's on my right at the moment, right side up, I'm going to flick over so the wrong side is up, and then I can place it on top of this pattern piece just here. And then I'm going to just pin that in place. Just put a couple of pins in. You better put in a couple of pins in than than just one, because if you just put one pin in, this seam can sometimes twist. And obviously put in as many as you're comfortable with. If you need another one in here to feel comfortable, then just pop another pin in. You don't have to follow me exactly with the number of pins, just go with whatever you're comfortable with. And then we've got the other side here, which was on the left when the right side was up. We're going to flick that over so the wrong side's up, so that we can pop that onto the other side, and then we can put a pin in order just to hold that together. Okay, so I'm going to now take this to the machine. Oops, I've got threads on my fingers. We're going to set our machine up now for our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And the way that I do that is I use something called a seam gauge, which is this. And it's got marks in inches and centimetres on it. But if I put my seam gauge behind the needle and hold it with my, just push my finger against the needle and then put my seam gauge against my finger, then I can see that I'm over the 3/4 inch seam allowance. And on some machines, well, most, you can actually move your needle across to the left or the right, and I just do that until I'm comfortable that my measure is telling me that the 1/4 inch is on the edge of my presser foot. So I'm looking for my 1/4 inch seam allowance to be here, so that when I'm sewing, I can run the raw edge of the fabric down the edge of my presser foot, and that will give me a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can't use well, you can for straight seams, but you can't use a 1/4 inch seam foot, one that has a little guide, a longer piece of metal on the side here as a guide, because when you're going around corners, you can't use that. So that's why I use this, and I'm always looking at the point across from where this little gap is in the presser foot, where the needle goes in, because that's the point at which we need it to be 1/4 inch. So that's the way that I do mine. And I find a needle position of 6.5 on my machine will give me that 1/4 inch, but you'll need to just check yours to see what works for you. I've also got a Microtex needle in my machine as well, which is the one that I like to sew with, and that's by Schmetz. And I've got a size 80 on here, although I could have gone down to a size 70 as well. So when I'm ready to sew, I'm going to hold on to my threads, just making sure my threads are going through the machine. I'm going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back, and then I've got a button that puts my needle down into my work, and I engage that so that when I take my pins out, I don't get a jog in the fabric. If you've not got a needle up down button, you can also use your hand crank, which is here, and that will allow you to just put that needle in the work before you then stop. Once we've got the needle in the work, we can take the first pin out, because this needle is now holding everything in place. We're just going to run the fabric along the raw edge of the fabric, along that edge of that presser foot, until we get towards the top, and I'm going to stop and take my pins out. I don't sew over pins unless it's by mistake, but generally speaking I don't plan to sew over pins. And then I'm just going to reverse at the top edge there. Take my needle out of the work. I'm then going to snip my threads off for starting and stopping. And then we've got our first seam sewn just there. That dark there. So let's just do the other side as well whilst we're here. So let's line that up so that we can put that raw edge against the side of the presser foot. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work, and then we can then just run down that side seam. Stop to take your pins out, go down towards the bottom and reverse. Okay. And there we go, we've got the start of our waistcoat already made. So now I'm going to change over to my other thread, my pale grey, and whilst it's only been those two little seams, when you open it up and you look on the inside, then you don't want to be seeing that light grey and have those speckles of the light grey thread going through there. So that's why we're going to the trouble of changing. Let me change my threads over and I'll be back to you. Okay, so I've got my machine threaded up with my pale grey thread now. So let's just put the top side of the top fabric of our waistcoat into the machine. A few stitches forward, a few stitches back, and then needle in the work. Take out the first pin, and then just do exactly the same with this. Okay, so when we've sewn those two together, we end up with our pattern pieces looking like this. And what we're going to do now is take this to the ironing board and we're just going to press these side seams open. So I always press my seams first just to set the stitches, just press those straight down, just flat as they were, and then we can turn this over. We can use our fingers just to separate these two seam allowances, and then we can then just press those flat. We don't need to neaten these seam allowances down with a zigzag stitch because they're actually going to be fully enclosed, and we've got a lovely neat finish for this waistcoat. So if you just hold off doing that, then you'll see what we'll do later. So let's just press it from the front as well, just to make sure that's all lying all lovely and flat. And then we can do the same with our lining fabric as well. Just be careful with lining fabric that your iron isn't too hot, because cotton can take a higher heat than the polyester lining fabric can. So I have turned my iron down just to accommodate for that. So next thing we're going to do is we lay the top side of our waistcoat down on our work surface. We're then going to put, with the right side up, we're then going to put the lining right side down so that all of our seam allowances are on the outside, and we're going to start to match up some of our points. So I've got a point down at the bottom of each front here on the bottom of the waistcoat. Maybe if I turn it, which way is better? Oh, you can see both ways, that's fine. So let's get those two matched up first because they need to match, and that's really important, that front side of the waistcoat. We can then match at the bottom of the neck. I'm just finding some little match points just to start us off really. So that's fine there. And let's do the other side over here. And because we've cut them both out of the same pattern pieces, they should fit perfectly. And there we go. And then down at the back of the waistcoat as well, let's match that. And then at the back of the neckline on the neck as well, let's match that. So we're just going around and just matching all of these match points. So we can do the side seams now as well. Just going to continue round, but I just do want to get you to find two pins that are the same colour top, and I use red pins for mine, because what I want to do is I want to mark down on one section, and a section of about 1.5 inches that we just mark with red pins. I have got other red pins elsewhere just like that, because that's going to be a start and stop, because we are actually going to be sewing round every single corner and an edge on this waistcoat, except for between these two pins. If you don't have two pins the same colour, then the other thing that you can do, or your pins are the same colour, you can actually put two pins together, and that also works well to mark. So where I see two pins in the same kind of area together like those two there, then that also tells me then that that's a start or a stop place. But being as I've got red ones, I'm going to use those. So just keep on just putting your pieces together and pinning those together, and we're just pinning these edges together for now, and then I'm just going to go round and tack it. So let me just do that, get my needle and thread ready, because that probably will do for now. I use this orange again that I've been using through, and I'm going to use a single thread of tacking thread because it just makes it just easier to follow. So let me just redo this one. Let's put a knot in the end. And let's just start and stop somewhere. So I'm just turning it upside down because I think it's easier to get used to your tacking on this bottom edge rather than when you're going around the hems here. So I'm just going to tack mine just within where I think the seam allowance is going to fall, so just under 1/4 inch on this edge here. Pins are going to get in the way a little bit, but monumentally tied up, didn't I then, hey? Let's just get this straight. If I leave my thread over the top, then it shouldn't get so tangled up with my threads. Just make sure your raw edges are together as you're tacking. Leave your thread up across, and it's quite big stitches that I'm using, but I'm just trying to stay within that seam allowance at the bottom. And as we start to tack, we can remove our pins as well, which then makes it easier because we've got less for them to get our threads to get tangled up on. So let me just hold this up for you. That's the kind of size stitches that I'm doing on mine. I'm just working around the edge. You can do a couple at a time as well on the straight edges. Just make sure you don't pull your threads up at all, so you don't want to have your threads tight on your tacking stitches. They just want to lay just nicely along the edge of the garment or the edge that you're working with. So just keep laying it down every now and again and just making sure that everything's all sitting all nicely. Okay, so we're going to go all the way around the garment, but we're going to leave that 1.5 inches open on a straight edge. You wouldn't ever leave 1.5 inches open on a curved edge, always on a straight edge, because that's much easier to be able to neaten up. So just carry on doing that and then come back to me when you've done that, and we'll talk about how to sew this, because I want to teach you a technique that you might not be aware of called pivoting, and it can be a bit of a game changer with your sewing if you learn how to pivot for sewing round corners. And that's going to be really important for when we do sew this garment together, because it's going to save you a lot of frustration. Okay, I'm just going to get all of my tacking done and I'll come back to you. Okay, so once you've finished tacking all of yours, then this is what yours will look like, all the way along the edge, all the way at the top there. And then you can see just here, I've got a little gap, oops, if I get my finger in, just here, where I've left that open. And just be aware that the bigger the gap, the more noticeable it'll be, but you still need enough to be able to bunch this fabric up and pull it through. But I mean, how much have I left here? Oops, where's my seam gauge? Yeah, exactly 1.5 inches. So let's see how I manage with that, and then you'll be able to see, and I'll put a note on the screen to say whether I managed well with 1.5 inches, so you'll know whether to leave any more than that. But I suspect that that's all going to be fine. So let's take this to the sewing machine now. I've got my light grey thread in at the moment, so that's fine. So you'll be able to see that on this section. And we're going to start off from one place where we have started tacking. And then I'm going to sew 1/4 inch. Now, with the pivoting that I want to show you, this is going to be quite interesting, I think, if you've not done this before. It's all about leaving your needle in your work so that you can then lift your presser foot and change your direction. So let me show you. Let's just start this off. Let's just start at one end, couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work, either with the button if you've got one, or by your hand crank if you've not. So needle into your work, and then we're going to sew down to the little point at the back of the waistcoat. And when we get on top of that, pretty much, and we can see the directions change, then I'm going to leave my needle in the work, I'm going to lift up my presser foot, and then I'm going to change direction. So the fact that the needle is through your fabric means that this can't go anywhere. You can't pull it off. So it helps you to then not get a little jog in your stitches when you're stitching. So I've changed direction, so now let's go up to this section here. So we're going to stand right on top of that side seam stitching, and then I can see here that my fabric is going off the edge of my presser foot. So needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, and then I'm going to spin until my presser foot is even with the raw edges of the fabric again, and then I'm going to stitch down, and then I'm going to guesstimate where I am. Now if you wanted to, you could have used something like, hold on a second, a chalk pencil, and you can use a seam gauge just to give you a little line to work to. So if, for example, I could do a line like that going into the corner of the fabric, or then just go ahead and do that for your corners, and it'll give you a start and stop point. So we'll see whether we work or not. The other thing that you can do is then also is just twist. So I've put my needle in my work, lifted my presser foot, and I've twisted. So let's sew now towards this corner. And I can see that edge quite clearly. So again, needle in the work, lift up the presser foot, and then we're going to then change direction and sew down the front. So I'll do all of that on the straight on the edges where it's just like a easy one turn. But when we're sewing around these arm size, that's really going to become really important. So I'll carry on for now, and I'll stop again when we get to that section. I'm just going to repeat those pivot turns. So we're coming up to a edge here. So I'm going to lift my presser foot up and I'm going to line up across from where my needle goes through the presser foot onto the fabric and through into the fabric, and I'm going to take a few stitches until at that point the fabric doesn't want to run along that edge anymore. Now sometimes you can move your fabric gently by just putting a little bit of pressure on it, but on a tight curve like this you'll get to the stage where the fabric starts to bunch up, and that's where this pivoting really comes into its own. But you're just going to do lots of very small changes. So let's have a look, let's count how many changes I do around this this arm side, and you'll do either more or less, but it'll just give you an idea. So let's do the first one and then do a couple of stitches. So that's 1, and then I'm going to do again 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I might have lost count with one there somewhere, don't shout at me, 10, 11, and let's just move this bit that we've already sewn out of the way for now so we don't sew over it, 12, so about between 12 and 14 we've made those little pivots around this corner, and I'll show you how they look afterwards. Let me just carry on now, and I'm just going to do that same technique around the back of the neck as well, lots of different little turns as well, and around the other arm side, and then I'll come back to you when I finish this, because all the techniques are exactly the same as you've already seen. Just rewind the video back if you need to see any more of that detail at all, or just to understand it a bit more, or just watch the video until I've got past this section to see how it looks when it's finished, and sometimes that can actually give you a lot of clues as to what I'm actually trying to achieve. Sometimes it's difficult if you're just doing what I say without actually seeing what that results in at the end. So I'll carry on with this now, but I am going to stop. Don't forget to leave my gap. So I stop where my tacking thread stop, so that we've got this little gap here for turning it through, and I'll come back to you when we're finished. Okay, so I've just finished. This is what mine's looking like with the tacking threads in and with the main threads in. So you can see I've left my gap just here, but hopefully you can see that around these arms we've got a lovely smooth line round there, and around this one just here as well, and the back of the neck. So what we need to do now is let's just take out our tacking threads. So there's a couple of tips to help you with that if they get stuck in your stitching, because sometimes they do. Let's just keep taking this out for now and see how we get on. Take that piece off for now. All bunched up. Look, so those big stitches just make it nice and easy just to pull through the fabric. We can use our quick unpick as well just to loosen it off. Again, ready for the next bit to come out. So you've because we guesstimate where that 1/4 of an inch is. So where you might have sewn through a piece of your tacking stitch, if it won't come out first time, just break one side quite close to your stitches, and then when you do the other side it should pull out. Don't try and yank it when you've got a big length of tacking threads, because what it means is that you've actually pierced the tacking thread with the needle, because the thread is twisted as it's when it's manufactured, and if your sewing machine needle goes through that thread with the needle and pierces it, it kind of forms a bit of a little knot. But just by cutting one side short, it allows that piece of thread to untwist, and then you'll be able to pull it out much more easily than yanking out your threads. So it's just it's a little thing that's probably quite very obvious to a lot of people, but if you're looking for an easy way to do things, then I'm always looking for easy ways to do things. So let's just take out that knot now for the orange thread. So that's all of our orange thread out. So it's just left It's just left our stitching line now. And the next thing that we want to do now is we want to clip into our curves. This should all just lie flat, and it does. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the arm side on both sides and the back of the neck. And we need to make some little snips to make these all lie properly, because when this fabric goes through to the inside, it needs to splay a little bit in order for it to lay flat. So we're going to take our snips or some little scissors, and you're going to make little cuts into the seam allowance at a right angle to your stitch line. And then if I open those out, can you see? Well, we might not be able to see that way. Let's see that side. How those open out. So they need to be able to splay open as we turn this through. So you're going almost up to just a thread or two away from your stitch line. If you go through your stitch line, then you're going to need to load this back into your sewing machine, and you're going to just need to reinforce the seam just a little bit further into your waistcoat, so that you've got that nicely caught and fastened down. So there's one. So if I hold that for you like that, you can see it together. But then if I open it out, can you see how those these are splay out to allow the fabric to flatten? And that's what we need. So we're going to do that on the back of the neck and both arm sides. And the rule of thumb is the steeper the curve or the tighter the curve, the closer together those snips you need to be. But I'm doing mine about like that kind of distance. We'll do this side too. Just make sure you don't go through those stitches. And the other thing I don't do is I don't have my scissors with the blade right across the garment like that to do the little snips. Just use something with a sharp nose, because if you nudge or the fabric's a bit thicker than you think and you just sort of give it a bit more force, or somebody nudges you or distracts you, if you've got a cat on your lap or something like that, then sometimes they can jump, or a dog nudges your leg, then you can quite easily cut through into your fabric. So you just need to be aware of that so that you can avoid that happening. And actually on this edge here we needed a couple of snips. That's the front edge that's going to go down from on his neckline. Just make sure that's got a few snips in it as well, because that will help that sit flat. And then we're just going to then trim our corners as well. Let me just finish this edge. So anywhere you've got a right angle, like at the top of the shoulder here, we're going to just take that off at just wider than a 45-degree angle. But you're going to go close to, but not through your stitches. So again, let's just take this off just slightly wider than 45, because then when that all folds in, it just reduces the bulk in those corners. So we'll do those on each of those shoulders. Just take those off. And all these little bits just make such a difference. If you're not sure whether they help or not, then the other thing that I've said to people before, because obviously experience helps and tells you, and I know that these work, but if it's the first time you're thinking about clipping into a curve, clip one arm side but leave the other one unclipped, and trim a couple of corners but leave the other ones untrimmed for now. And then when we turn it through, you can have a look and see, and you can have a feel with your fingers how that actually works. Now, I have got skill builder videos on my channel that talk about the clipping as well of these edges and seams, because it can make such a difference. But if you've not come across it before, then again, you might not be too sure about how effective it is. So if you just do half your garment and then turn it through and have a feel with your fingers and see what you think and see if you prefer it, then that's the best way of knowing whether something works for you and is worth that extra effort or not. So I've been round and I've trimmed all of mine, so let's just put all of these bits in the bin before I traipse them all through the house, which is my usual trick. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is just going to take this to the ironing board, and before we actually do anything else, I'm just using the cotton side up, and I'm just going to give everything a press just to set those stitches into those seams that we've already sewn. Okay, so just a little press, and we'll need the iron again in a minute. But just for now, that's fine. And then the other thing I want to get is a knitting needle. Hold on one second. I've just got a knitting needle and I'm going to use the point end but also the blunt end because it does help to push things through. Or you might have something called a turning tool as well that you can use. I think Prim do a turning tool, don't they? But what we're going to do is we're going to just put our thumb inside our garment through our hole, and we're going to go to the furthest away point, which is the front edge of one of these waistcoat fronts. And then I hold onto it with my finger and my thumb, and then by holding it I can now pull the fabric over the top of there, and so it comes out with on my finger. And then very gently we're going to start and turn this round. This is where we hope we've left enough room with that gap. I think we will have done. So we start just pulling this all through. And once we've got it started, then it starts to get easier. And the other thing we can do is sort of fold that edge back on itself as well as we're pulling things through. And that helps not put too much strain. So again, we can put our thumb through to this front now, up into the shoulder, and do the same thing again, and that will pull that through. So this makes sure that all of the raw edges are on the inside. So here's a front. So now we can start and use either the blunt end of the knitting needle first, and just start and use that just to push into those corners and up into those shoulders, just to get all of that turned around into the back of the neck here. And the blunt end, just make sure you don't go through your fabric at all. Just starts to push it all through. And then once we've got it kind of roughly in shape, and I'd say that's roughly in shape now, we can now use the point if we want to. But you've really got to work really carefully, because you're just teasing out those corners now rather than putting pressure on it. So we're just making sure that we're not going to go through the fabric, and we're just running that knitting needle through those areas up into the corners of the shoulders. Just make sure, and that, as I say, should all now sit nice and flat for you. So let me just keep doing this. Oops, see, I've just poked my hole through mine, so you've just got to be really careful. I'm probably close to the seam allowance there. I can always go back in and reinforce that, but we'll see how it sews together when it's time. And along this edge here to this corner. So you're coaxing and teasing rather than prodding and poking. I think that's the way that I'll describe it with this. Just onto the front, down into that point, down into the point down at the front, and down back here. So that's looking quite nice there. So let's get our ironing board back again now. And then we can always use a pin if we need to, just to coax out any final little bits in the corners at all if they're not quite out. But you're looking for your stitch line to be on the edge here. So you've not got any lining showing on the front, and you've not got any of the front showing on the lining. So that's what we're aiming for when we do this. We can rest it on on our little mat as well, just to make sure that we've got all of these points out to the stitch line. And then what you can do is you can actually pin it to, if you've got an ironing board cover or one of these wool pressing mats, you can actually pin through your garment and just hold it down, and that will help keep its shape as well, so that when we come to iron it, we can iron or press it in between those areas, and it'll just make sure that they stay nice and flat for us. It's all about just getting that great result, isn't it? So hopefully you can see now that I've got a nice flat arm side, because I know that inside all of those cuts will be splaying open in order to allow this all to lie flat. And at this moment in time, I'm not paying a lot of attention to where the gap is that we left open. I'm just going along and just pinning this down just to make sure that it all stays flat as much as possible, and any corners just get pulled out. So take your time with this section, because once you've done this, you've done it for good, haven't you? It's not something you've got to keep repeating. And we're actually going to press the seam allowance up on the gap as if it were closed with stitches. I hope that makes sense. So I'll show you in a second. Just going to get these corners out. And I've got the cotton side up because the cotton can take the heat better than the polyester lining can do. Okay, that's probably going to do for now. So now I can just take my iron. You can use a press cloth if you want to, but I'm just going to press around and towards these edges between my pins primarily, because that's where we need to have the heat. And by doing this, it just allows us just to get into all of those different areas really nicely. I'm really happy with how this is looking. It's going to look great, isn't it? Then once we've got those sorted out for now, just leave your garment on your pressing mat and remove your pins, because then we're going to just press it without the pins in place. And I'll just move it up onto my board, and that will just give it a little bit more in between those pins. It just gives us a little bit more manoeuvrability now that we've got the majority of those corners out. So where we've got our opening here, what I want you to do is fold the lining in as much as you can so that you've got a smooth line as if that was just stitched. So you should be able to just fold that together so those edges are together. And so that lining is just sitting inside, which it doesn't quite want to do nicely for me, but it's going to be pressed into submission. So I'm just using the edge of a pin just to make sure that that's all under, and then I can just give it a nice press again. Just turn it over, make sure that's all nice and smooth. This neck edge just needs to pull out just a little bit, I think. So I'm just looking for anywhere where I can see too much of the front on the underneath, because I just need that just to sit nicely. There we go. Okay. So this is what we're left with now. So now we're going to thread up a hand sewing needle. I want something quite fine. That one will do nicely. And we need some thread as well, so let's get some thread. Okay, so with our hand sewing needle, we're just going to identify where the gap is in the lining, and I'm going to put my knot in so that I come just a couple of stitches before. So I'm threading my needle in and through the top fabric side of things. So there's the edge of my lining where it's stitched down, and I've just come a little bit further in front, and I'm not on the outside, and I've got it buried on the inside because it's going to bury our knot on the inside. So the knot has gone in now and under behind here. So now what I'm going to do is take a little thread of the lining fabric and move slowly along that pressed edge, just attaching and taking a stitch in turn out of the lining edge and out of the fabric edge, just so that we can close this gap up almost invisibly. And because we've got a contrast colour thread, it might not be perfect, and hand stitching is one of those things that just takes time and patience. But we're just not going through onto the outside of the fabric, we're just running along this edge, and sometimes it can be easier to hold it between your finger and thumb like this and just go slightly to the inside of that ironed edge. And we can just tack that, well, slip stitch it closed. It's really a slip stitch if you wanted to look that up on the internet. Oh, I can hear the rain. It's good, we need it. We've had quite a long dry summer and autumn here, so we desperately need the rain. But then I always think a rainy day is a good day for a sewing day anyway, isn't it? So I never mind that it's raining. Okay, so we're just going to keep going along here until that's all sealed up, and hopefully you can see that once we've stitched that, that should be pretty much invisible on both sides. You've just got that little bit of hand stitching down this edge. So let me just finish this, and then when I come to the end, I'm just going to go a couple of stitches into my machine stitching and just do a couple of stitches in place between the two, and then I'm going to, oh, I'll bury a long thread. I can talk to you about that, can't I? Let me just come back to you in a second when I want to finish off. Okay, so I'm ready to finish off. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches just in place, just in order to sort of cast off that thread, if you like. You don't need much because there's going to be no pressure on that seam at all. But then when I've done that, I don't like lots of little short edges, said she, finding one just there. Oh, that's just a thread came off. I don't like lots of little short edges poking out in my stitching. So I always leave a long tail. And the way I do that is I poke my needle in right close to my last stitch. And then I feed the needle through the garment between the two sides, making sure not to catch any of the fabric. So I can't see my needle that side and you can't see my needle that side. And then I'll come out about an inch, inch and a half away from where I finished sewing. What to do then is then I just put a little bit of pressure on the seam. Can you see it just gathering up just here? Because then when I actually snip off that thread close to the edge, it pulls, there's my raw edge just there, look, when I straighten out my fabric, it pulls that raw edge in, but you've got a nice long tail then that isn't going to poke out. So that's what I do with mine. The next thing we're going to do then is put another knot in the bottom of our thread because we're going to sew the shoulder seams. So let's get that all ready. So with this, we've got our knot. So what I want to do is almost the reverse. So I'm going to start off within my lining side and have my knot away from the seam edge that I'm doing, because that'll help it easier while we sew it. So I've got my needle going through here and coming through there, but it's not showing on the other side. So that will then put the knot away from where I'm stitching, which is just here. Because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to see where your arm circle is, your arm side is. We're going to put those two edges together to make an armhole for him, for our character. And we're going to rest those two edges up together. And then we're going to then put a little stitch in, a couple of little stitches in place, just on the edge, just to hold that together. So it's kind of taking the place of a knot by doing a few stitches together at that point. So I've got that restricted now. And now I'm just going to take a little bite. So if I fold them together so that they're resting against each other, and take a little bite out of the back of the shoulder and a little bit out of the front of the shoulder. And I'm just going to do a little stitch all the way along here. So a little bite, oops. And I'm probably going to go across twice just to make sure that it's nice and neat. You could also do this on the outside, but I thought it might be better, sorry, on the inside, on the lining fabric, but I think it's going to be better if we do it on the outside just here. Oops. Can't get my stitch. Because what we want is that when we pull this open like that, look, it holds that together as if it was stitched from the inside. So just going along, and I'll do that same finishing off technique that I've just showed you as well, which is to leave the long tail, because I always do that if I can. Oops, sorry, I'm just nudged the camera. Just get those stitches nice and tight. And if you've used the same seam allowance all the way around your waistcoat, then it should match up. And if you've got your corners pulled out correctly. So I'm pulling out into a corner. So I've just got those stitches together. So let's just turn this round so we can neaten this off. So we're going to the other corner. We're going to do just a few stitches in place just around this edge here, just so that it holds it together. And I find sometimes trying to go through both sides at the same time is just a little bit tricky. So by doing through one side and then through the other, it tends to just make it a bit easier. Right, so that's got that all nice and sealed. So now let's do that long thread again. So I'm just going to go inside, in between the two. So I'm between the top and the bottom. I'm going to come out through my lining, and then I'm going to just then put some pressure on my thread so that pulls that one through. And then if we go back to where our starting thread was, we can just put a little bit of pressure on that and cut the knot off, and that end will go through into side as well. Okay, so I'm just going to do the other shoulder as well. So there's one shoulder done. I'm just going to match up the other one and sew the other shoulder together, and then I'll come back to you and we'll talk about buttons and fastenings. Okay, so now we have a lovely little waistcoat for Harvey. Let's just try that on him, because we're going to be looking at button placement. So that goes over his arms nicely. You're going to look dapper in this, Harvey. Going to fit under his collar. Just make his collar out at the back, that's it. And then this is going to then wrap over to do his buttons. So again, the way that I work out which way, because generally with guys it's left over right, and with ladies it's right over left. So I'm going to put Harvey with his back to me, because that's the way that I remember, because I'm challenged on these things. So I've got my left hand, so my left hand is this side, so I'll put a pin in this side just here, and that will then tell me that that's the side that we need to put in the press studs in. So this is all going to fit all beautifully for him. So let's take that back off you again, Harvey. It's looking lovely. And then I have got some little buttons, these little buttons here, which I got from Lilly Rose Dolls. They do sell some haberdashery, so you'll need to have a word with them and see if they've got... I think they sell the haberdashery at the shows. I'm not sure if they post that out at the moment, but that might be something that they're going to change, so do check back. But these are just little little metal buttons, 5mm buttons they are, it says. So we've got two, if we look at the picture of Harvey on the front of the pattern, which is where I'm going to refer back to, these buttons start just here, so they're just a little bit down from the top edge there, and then they go down and then they stop a little way up, so they're about in line with... They start here along this point here, and then they stop at this point here. So I will be using some thread to do mine. Tip these out onto my work surface. I know we only need 8, so let's put 2 back in there to save for another day. And I know which side I'm working on now, so let's do the same sort of thing that we did before. Let's put a knot in the bottom of our thread. And I am going to be sewing my buttons all the way through on here, because I'm not going to worry about the lining and seeing the buttons on the stitches for the buttons on the inside of the lining. I suppose I could use a grey thread. Right, I'm going to use dark green thread, because that will hide those stitches a little bit, won't it? Won't make them quite so jolting. So let me just thread my needle up with some thread. Just trying to think ahead, isn't it? Just to make sure that we've got everything we need. And the other thing that we need to be aware of as well is to make sure that our needle will go through the holes on our button, and that one will do, so that's fine. And because we're sewing on buttons, I'm going to have my thread double, because then you have to do less stitches to attach those on, which again can make it look a bit neater. Oops. Oh, it's really throwing it down now outside. Right. Okay, so let's do a knot, and then I'm just going to take off the loose ends on that knot, just so that that's fine. Okay, so first button's fine. The other thing that I try to do is, you know where you've got your holes on your buttons, I'm going to make sure that they're all going east to west. Try if you, again, that's something else that just makes things look really nice and neat, if you just have your buttons all going the same way. I'm going to go quite close to the edge here to start off with, and I'm going to thread my button on before I try and place it. So I don't try and place my button and thread it onto my thread at the same time. And then once that's in place, I can then go through through into my other side and sew these on. So I sew my buttons on first because you need to go in and out of the fabric in order to sew buttons on, and then underneath I'll put the press studs on underneath, and that will then hopefully keep that all nice and neat. So I'm just doing about 3 stitches through each one. Through each button, making sure those the holes on the buttons are going across the garment. Take my pin out now because I know where we're going. And then if we measure, let's have a look and see how far apart these buttons are going to go. I'm going to put a pin, I think, to help me know. So I'm going to put another one just here. And then we want to spread these buttons out so that they're equal going across. So if I put my pins in what I kind of think with my eyes are straight first, it's looking not too bad. I'm measuring from the inside of one button to the next one. A little bit of trial and error, but these pins, I'm just taking a little bite of the fabric, and then the pins will help tell me where I actually need to stitch that button on. Yeah, happy with that. So that's where I am. So I'm 7/8 of an inch between each of my buttons on mine. Yours might be a different measurement. But then without cutting the thread off, I'm going to then travel down between the lining and the main fabric to the next place where the next button's going to go, denoted by the pin, and come out there. I'm going to then thread my button onto my needle. In and out. Oops. And if anybody watched my shirt video, I've got buttons pinging everywhere. So take that one out now. We've got that in place with the stitch. Make sure my holes are going straight across, and that I'm about the same distance from the edge, the neck edge of the, well, not the neck edge, the front edge of the waistcoat, and then take a stitch. And then once I'm happy they're in the right place, we can then just go back in and out. And then I'm just going to go all the way down and just travel between those, in between the two edges, and that just stops me having to do a little knot while I'm sewing a button on, and stops me having to cast off. So it just keeps things neater. Just travel between, just make sure you don't gather your stitches up at all. You know, you don't put any tension on your thread and pull it so that it makes the front of the waistcoat pucker. Okay, I'm just going to sew those on, and then I'm just going to come back, and I'm probably going to do them probably about 1 centimetre apart, aren't they? They're not, yeah, 1 centimetre apart, I think, and then do my next row, maybe 1.5 centimetres. No, 1 centimetre apart, and from the edge, and then just sew the next row along as well, and then I will come back to you and we'll sew on our press studs. Okay, and so there we are with all 8 of our buttons all nicely sewn on, and actually they're fairly neat on the inside as well. We're using that colour thread to match that lining. And then the final thing that we're now going to be doing is just sewing a row of press studs on. I think I'm going to do 3, and we want to just sew those down. I'm going to match the top and the bottom, and then probably go just in between the final 2. You could sew 4 in, maybe I'm being a little bit lazy, I don't know, but it's up to you. I think 4 might be a bit too many for what we need, but I can understand why people would feel happier sewing them on underneath the buttons. So I'm just going to take the thread that I've already, needle and thread that I've already got threaded. I'm using the dark green again because we're on the inside, so I'm matching my thread to my lining fabric. And then what I'm using is these little clear plastic hooks, and can you see them just here? The little clear ones, press studs, but you can use the silver ones or the black ones, it's up to you, whichever you prefer. And then I'm going to put the knobble bit underneath the actual underneath the button, so I can take a thread, a stitch through first through, and then the threads that I use to attach the button, and so that will hide my knot, and then I can just place my press stud on top. And I'm just going through the lining fabric, I'm not sewing through the top fabric at all. So just 2 or 3 stitches in each of those 4 corners for that, just holding that in place. And I'm only sewing them underneath the front edge of the, or the lead edge if you like of the waistcoat, just to hold those in place. Just make sure you don't distort the front of your waistcoat at all. Just keep checking to make sure none of your stitches have gone through. And that will just hold that in place just by going through those edges and just going through the lining fabric. And you can travel one between the others if you've got enough thread on your needle like before, just make sure that's not gone through. No, it's fine. And then we can just sew those on. And then that will help that just stay closed onto Harvey, then keep the garment onto him. So I'm just going to sew these on. I'll come back to you just in a moment when I've got the first 3 sewn on down the front, because I'll just show you how I make sure that I'm in the right place for the next one. Okay, so we have our press stud sewn on the inside, the little bobbly bits on the inside of there. Let's just try this back onto Harvey again. Keep teasing him, don't we, with this waistcoat, but it's going to go on and stay on in a moment or two. Just easier to sew when it's not on him. Just pull his shirt down and just make sure that's all sitting all nicely, which it is. Okay, and then on the front here, we just want to see how much we want to overlap that. And it'll depend on how much you've stuffed your character or not. And there isn't a right or wrong answer, because it'll just look however it's going to look. But once you've actually sort of got it into place as to where you want your press studs to be along that edge, what I do then is I take a pin, I fold back, let me turn it this way so you can hopefully see. I fold back the edge with my press stud, and I can see my press stud just down there, and I just take a very small bite of the fabric where I want where the top of the press stud is going to hit, and I move up and do the next one. We will even these up as we go, but we just need that sort of like that horizontal way to do things. So let's start off with the bottom one first. So I'm going to go against what I just said, saying that it was easier to sew it when it's not on the character, and I'm going to sew this whilst it is on the character. But what I would just want to make sure is that so this one here, the little bite of fabric is further in from the edge than that one, so I'll move it out slightly, but making sure that I don't lose the dimension going across, so that it sort of matches the one above. And then once I'm ready, I'm going to then put my needle through. And once we've marked the position with the needle, then we can then take the pin out, take the ends off my knot, which I should have done before. Just move that pin sideways so that I can see where I'm working. And then I want one of my other press stud bits. I'm going to come back up through my other side of my waistcoat, and then I can then place it so that the hole is pretty much on top of where the knot was. And for this I can go all the way through, it doesn't matter so much. But again, I'm using the greeny coloured thread, which is pretty well masked by the pattern on this fabric that I've got anyway. But just match your thread to whichever side, probably match it to the top side if it wasn't quite so well hidden on my thread. I'm going to move along and sew on the next little section. So I'm just going through the holes on the press stud and just sewing that over the edge to the fabric. I'm just doing about 3 stitches per hole, which by the time you've done all 4 corners should be plenty. Because then to do the next one, to finalise the next one, I will actually I will fasten this one up first to make sure that we get it in the right place, and that does give you quite a good degree of accuracy then as well. So just take, and the other thing you're probably finding as well as I do, that sometimes the finishing off on these garments, especially if you've got lots of little buttons and press studs, take a long time actually to sew it in place. So just allow yourself that time, because you could probably sew a whole new waistcoat in the time that it takes you to sew your press studs and your buttons onto your final garment. But it's really important to get them looking nice. Right, so I'm going to travel up and behind to my next one, and I did end up doing 4 in the end. I don't have OCD, but my head wouldn't allow me to put a press stud in the middle of where a button was. So let's fasten up this first one, and then that then gives us an anchor point now to start and make sure that this next one is lined up. So I've got my pin there, my pin's in roughly the right place, so that's fine. So now I can undo that one whilst we just sew this one in place, and then I'll do the same all the way up, just to make sure that that's the press studs and their counterparts are all in the right place. And again, I'm looking at the same distance away from the edge of the waistcoat to make sure that they're all nice and even as well. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on sewing these on now. You don't need to see me do that again. You've already seen what is happening here. Nothing much other than me sewing things on, and then I will come back to you once we've finished. And we're close now. And so there we are, just finished. Lovely, lovely waistcoat on Harvey. All the way around, looking lovely. Really, really happy with that. It fits in beautifully, and I'm really, really happy with the way that's come out. The finish, those little buttons are just adorable, aren't they? So let me just turn the camera around, and we'll have a little round up for that, and then I'll be on to his jacket. Okay, so we have our finished Harvey, and I hope that you, well, not finished Harvey, the finished waistcoat for Harvey, and excuse my hair, and I hope that you've enjoyed stitching along with me today. As I say, I think that he looks really, really smart in that. And then the other thing that we've got to do is just add his crushed ribbon to his neck chief and to make his little cravatty style tie. So let me just add that on just for a moment. But and whilst I say that, I hope you found value in today's video, if I can get my words right, and if you have, then I'd be really grateful if you would consider subscribing to my channel. I don't know whether you know how YouTube works, but the more people that like or comment on the videos, then the more likely they are to push those videos out to other other viewers, really, and that's what promotes my channel. So if you are able to leave me a little message or give the video a thumbs up as well, that really helps too. So I'm just getting his collar just right. There we go. I've got his little bow there on the top there, so that looks really nice too. I've probably got a little bit tight for him, but I can adjust that just finally whilst I'm off camera. But I just wanted to tie that and just show you how that's all looking. But yeah, if you've enjoyed the videos, I'd love it if you were a subscriber. I'd love you to give me a thumbs up and perhaps leave a comment. Let me know where in the world you're watching from, whether it's raining with you as it has been today for me. The next thing we're going to be doing is sewing his jacket. That'll be the next video, and then finally we'll finish with his cap as well. So we've got plenty more to be doing, but I've really enjoyed this stitch today, and I hope you have too, and I look forward to you joining me on another day. Take care everybody, happy stitching, bye.